finally got your first leadership gig, loving the new role, but feeling the pressure of your new responsibilities and all that expectation to perform? Well, don't worry, you're not alone. Crossing the chasm from a technical role to leadership, from doing stuff to managing and leading people, is the toughest challenge any leader must make. Welcome to the Human Edge Show, the podcast dedicated to help you do just that, successfully cross the doing to leading chasm. Campbell Such here, Chief Chasm Crossing Guide. I've made all the mistakes so you don't have to. I want to help you learn those lessons much more easily by sharing my experiences and talking with brilliant people who have already figured it out. You'll get great actionable tips, strategies, and techniques to make the transition so much easier and faster for you. Now let's get to it. Well, welcome to another episode of the Human Edge Show. Today, I'm really pleased to have Derek Wilson from Red Hat on board. Derek, fantastic to have you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Campbell. Pleased to be here.
Great. Derek Wilson is a senior director at Red Hat. He's been Red Hat New Zealand country manager and part of the ANZ management team since July 2012, and also manages an Australian-based enterprise sales team. He has over 30 years experience in IT, including roles in systems development, project management, sales and management, both in New Zealand and in the UK. Derek has worked in a variety of organisations, from startups through to global organisations. Derek, prior to moving into sales, he had a career initially as an engineer and then as a programmer analyst and eventually running development teams. Derek is qualified in control engineering and electrical engineering. That's awesome background, Derek, for our conversation. So just to kick things off, what's one thing that not many people would know about you?
Well, Campbell, thanks for that. And if you look back at the bio you've just read, that what most people don't understand is that, because they see me as a sort of a sales leader or a sales guy or a country manager, that at 16, I left school slightly under a cloud. I was asked to leave school at 16. And I was lucky enough to get an apprenticeship. So at that time, I became an apprentice for 4 years. And that's where I learned to do, I was working for British Gas and doing control engineering and instrumentation. So I was very lucky for that. And a lot of people think, this is a guy that's been in sales for all his life, but it's not the case.
Oh. Did that gas apprenticeship, was it a plumbing apprenticeship or gas?
No, it wasn't. So it was British Gas have a whole network of telemetry systems and things like that run the whole gas network in the UK, and it was helping looking after and maintain that. So. Right.
So it was a technical role rather than a more of a practical role.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah,
very much. And in fact, moving on from that was really how I got into programming, because it actually went from doing the stuff out in the field to the head office where they design systems to run the field systems. So,
yeah. Oh, wow. And you got a tap on the shoulder? What happened? How did that transition happen?
I fell into it, yeah. So I was pretty good at what I was doing, and there was an opening in the head office, and when I thought, that's pretty interesting, and I'll become a programmer. So,
and then look where you are now. It's amazing, isn't it? So, just casting your mind back then, since we're kind of at that point in your career, can you just cast your mind back to those early days of your first leadership role or leadership roles, and just talk through a little bit about what brought on that transition, what you learned, what perhaps missteps you made that you might not want to make again if you knew what you know now and were doing it all over again, and anything else that might help a new leader moving into a leadership role from a technical role.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing is that when I moved into a leadership role, I've done it twice. I moved into a leadership role when I was still a programmer, if you like, and I moved into leading a development team. And then later on in life, when I changed into sales, I went back to being an individual contributor and then moved into a sales leadership role. And I think the thing that's, in hindsight, looking back, is that back when it happened, it was just assumed I could do the job. So, Derek, you're now the manager or the team leader or the whatever it happens to be. And so because you've applied for it and you said, yeah, we can do it, you can do the job. And that was it, left to my own devices. So you end up actually fumbling around trying to get the leadership role done without really understanding. That was probably the big thing from back then.
Yeah. And that's not uncommon. In fact, I
would suggest, based on my experience with dealing with leaders across organizations, is that it's a very common theme. It probably happens more often than not, where someone's put into a new leadership role because they were either put their hand up or technically very competent, or possibly this technical superstar, which is what often happens. And there's no lead in. They don't really get a chance to see whether they've got some leadership skills, that they understand that there's no training in advance, and it's really very much the sink or swim. And so, what did you do? You said you fumbled around, and that's a pretty apt description, I would say, for most leaders when they end up in that space. How did you cope with it? And what did you do to start to build your ability in leadership and your capability in leadership and your the success that you've built over the years?
I made a lot of mistakes. That was the first thing. And the other thing, just as an aside, I had to deal with was the fact that you're moving from being a peer of the people you're working with to become their leader, which was another challenge. But so I made a lot of mistakes. And the first mistake I made was just doing the job. And an example I give you is one of the leadership roles I did early when I was running a development team, was that my manager said to me, "Derek, I need a monthly report on what's happening in this development." So no, there was no boundaries. He said, "Just give me a monthly report." So I went away and designed a lovely monthly report and presented it to him every month. And after 6 months, I had a review with him, and he said, "This has not been a good 6 months." I said, "Why is that? We've made our objectives. I don't like your monthly reports." So back then I said, "Well, you've never mentioned that on our monthly meetings. When I give them to you, you just take them and say thank you very much." And I found out later he'd rewritten them all. Now, so my mistake then was not actually putting my hand up and not going upwards and asking for help. I guess that's the key thing. Just thinking I could do it and just doing it. So.
Yeah, and perhaps the flip side too was a reflection on his management style as well, which was that he wasn't giving you the feedback and the support that you really needed, or particularly the feedback in this case, which would have simplified his role, because he then had to go and do what he'd asked you to do, and was wasting your time.
Yeah. So I think I learned then about a bit about transparency and actually asking questions. And I also think, to your point about his role, I learned that as a leader, you've got to stop doing what you were doing before. And you've got to, if you were writing code before, or if you were doing whatever you were doing before, don't just go and do it because you happen to be the best person in the room to do it. You have to empower your people to do it, and you've got to stop doing it yourself. So,
and how do you go about doing that? Because particularly for people with a high degree of technical proficiency who step into a leadership role, when they look at the direct reports and the work that they're doing, it's very easy to say, or to look and say, "I could do that a lot better." And then you take it back, do it. And then the double whammy, it's not your job, it's your time. And it also doesn't help them get better. How do you go about letting go? Because that's tough. That's really
tough. Tough. And that was a big thing for me as a new leader as well, Campbell. It's in fact, I went actually on a leadership course many years ago where we talked about the question I was asked on that course was, what's the main problem you have with being a leader? And my main problem was delegation. Right? It absolutely was. So because I did that, I thought, I can do that twice as quick as you, so I'll do it. So really it was over time, and it was trying to move into a coaching and mentoring type role rather than a doing role, rather than just going and doing it. So I learned over the years to actually try and do that and to help the person succeed, to teach them to fish, if you like, rather than me doing the fishing myself. But it wasn't an instant overnight thing. It suddenly changed. It took quite a period of time. Yeah,
that's right, because it is difficult. As I can do it twice as quick as you. So if I do it once, it's only going to take half the time. The challenge is, of course, that job probably has to be done at least twice. So therefore, it's caught up to you already in terms of you not doing it. And if they have to be done 3, 4, 5, 10 times or 100 times, then you're just spinning your wheels, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So how do you? Was it an epiphany, or did it just develop over time that you kind of made that realization? Because one of the biggest challenges is giving something and then taking it back again. How do you make yourself recognize when you're doing that and then step into a coaching role? Because that's, there's a lot of talk about coaching in leadership today, and that's not something that I imagine when you first started in your role, certainly wouldn't have been taught. Sounded like you were dropped in at the deep end and without too much of that. how did you develop those skills as well? So how do you let go of it, and how do you let go of the technical, and how do you start on the journey of coaching?
Well, actually, I think it was my wife that gave me some feedback actually about being over busy and working all hours of the day, and why are you doing this? And I stepped back and looked at what I was doing, and I was doing two jobs almost. Right? So that was possibly the epiphany. Right? Yeah. So the fact that it was crazy hours, etc. And actually, what I did, I actually used an external mentor myself, an external coach, to help me with some of those issues, and that was really helpful. Right? So I actually took someone external from the company who was nothing to do with my management team, but who enabled me to step back and think about what I was doing and actually go and solve those problems myself, rather than her doing it, of course. But really, it was just a case of turning into someone who's trying to teach rather than someone who's trying to do. And it's not knowing it was an epiphany. Doing it wasn't an epiphany. It was still a time period thing. Right? So.
Yeah, so many times we know what to do, but we don't do it. Right? That's tough. And did that mentor sort of fall in your lap? Did you make a conscious decision? Based on some feedback from your wife, it might have been that you needed to seek some external help to just get some objectivity?
No, actually, coincidentally, I was going through some management training with a company that was able to provide that. So it was a good thing that happened in parallel with that feedback in this case.
Yes. So that was intentional, or was that?
It was intentional. Yeah,
it was intentional.
Yeah.
So perhaps something really important for a leader, putting a new leader in a role, is to consider that A, you need to be supporting them, but B, to put in some mentorship around them, both potentially internal, but maybe even more importantly, external to the company.
Yeah, I believe so. And if I look at what we do in Red Hat as an example, which is really good, we actually have a mentoring program within Red Hat where you can apply to have a mentor, or you can be a mentor. And so you pick up mentees. Now, this is internal people, but there'll be people who are entirely disconnected with your business. So, for instance, I was mentoring a person recently who was in Dubai, who was in our HR function, nothing to do with IT sales. Yeah. And so it effectively becomes an external mentor. So I find that a really useful thing over the last few years. Yeah. You always learn something as the mentor, you learn something as the mentee. And I think the other thing with new leaders, when you've got a new leader working for you, you've got to, despite the fact I said earlier that you need help from your leader, you've got to be careful not to micromanage people. Right? So you've got to empower them rather than micromanaging them. So.
Yeah, and that's that piece of letting go and coaching and teaching, isn't it? And giving them a look. Here's what I want done, and perhaps a little bit less of the how I want it done, so that they might bring some new ideas and fresh thinking to something that's been traditionally been done one way, or perhaps that you've always done one way, but you've never looked at it and thought, well, maybe there's a better way to do it. Yeah. If there was one piece of advice that you could give a new leader, what would it be?
There's one piece of advice, right?
Well, feel free to make it three if you like, but.
But I think what I'd give a new leader, especially if you've got a new leader who's leading a team themselves, is that you've got to make sure your team has got a common goal, that your team understands each other's abilities. So you've got to know your team well, understand your team's abilities. And then the other thing, you've got to expect conflict. It's going to happen. Right? A lot of people move into a leadership role and think it's going to be awesome. It's going to be easy thing to do because you've been doing a hard technical role or a sales role, whatever. But expect conflict and expect issues, and just prepare for that. Right, so.
Conflict's one of those things most of us tend to shy away from. I've always had an approach of pick your battles, but you still need some tools and skills to be able to once you've decided that's an important thing to
very much
to deal with. What's any advice around dealing with conflict? Because ultimately that's one of the biggest challenges for any leader, right? Is recognizing conflict, dealing with it, and not making it become like a stone in your shoe that just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think if I go back to making sure that the team know each other's abilities. I think one of the first things you've got to do is make sure that you've got the right person doing the right job. Right, that's one of the things that reduces it. Secondly, I think you can look at there's a number of techniques. You've heard of things like crucial conversations and those sort of things, where you actually start using some of those techniques to, if you've got a conflict, get people into a safe place before you, before you give them the feedback. And the other thing with feedback is you've got to convince people that feedback is a gift for them, right? And it's something that they need and they want, and they should accept it, right? So I think there's just a number of tools around giving feedback and things like crucial conversations.
Yeah, couple of things there. One is you talk about crucial conversations. That's the book that you're referring to, called Crucial Conversations.
Yeah.
Anyone that's watching this, I'd highly recommend that book. It's who's the author? Do you remember the author?
I don't remember. Sorry,
but it's a phenomenal book, and that whole idea of building an environment where you can have challenging conversations in a safe place is really powerful.
It allows you to. One of the things that I think it did for me was that I'm a person who likes transparency. I like being blunt. I like people to tell me you're doing something wrong. Whenever I get a new person into my team, the first thing I say to them is, you can tell me anything. If you think there's a better way for me to do something, please tell me, and I'll review it and discuss it. What the Crucial Conversations does, it makes you realise that not everyone's like that.
Yeah.
You've got different personality types, and it might be that John Doe or John Smith doesn't like that, but they react really badly to that and they go into a shell. So I think it's a really good skill set to have.
Yeah, and the great thing with that book is it gives you a framework to sort of work around to give you a set of a process, if you like, that while it's not rigid, can give you some confidence that you've got a mechanism that will help you surface the issue and then work through it, which is really powerful. The other thing you talked about, Derek, was feedback, and I fully agree with you. There's a saying that goes something like, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but it's the wise man or the wise person that wants to hear what they don't want to hear, and often feedback is negative or can be taken negative. And I've found personally that I've benefited the most from some of the toughest criticism I've ever received, but it hasn't stopped it from hurting, and it hasn't stopped my sense of I need to defend myself here from coming out. But my experience is that the worst thing you can do is defend yourself when someone's criticizing you. You really want to take it on board and probably ask some deeper questions and uncover even more of what's going on. How have you found that's worked for you personally when you've received criticism that's perhaps challenging, and also helped other people? Because that would be a really good skill to have, I would think, or knowledge to have, is how do you help your direct reports?
I think the same as you. What I used to do was do exactly the same as that. But I used to, if you gave me direct feedback, I'd think about it and then I'd try and defend it and argue about it. I did a management course many years ago where the first thing we did on this course, I got sat onto a chair and the guy running the course presented me a very nice wrapped object with a bow on top. And he gave it to me and I said, "Oh, thank you very much. I don't know what it is, but thanks for the gift." He said, "That's your feedback. You said thank you for the feedback and the gift, and that's what you should do when somebody gives you feedback. You say thank you, and then you sit back and consider it rather than argue about it, because it may or may not be true. The feedback may not have, it may not be completely true, but there's fact there somewhere. If someone thinks you're doing a bad job, you probably are in some form or another. So I think really what I've done now is I try and treat it like that and just try and treat it as a gift, not react, and step back and just analyse it and see what I can do better. It's not rocket science. It's just not arguing and trying to keep it simple.
Yeah, and if you take the view that it's a gift, then you tell yourself a different story, don't you? And instead of it becoming negative, even though it might sting, it gives you a chance to benefit from it. And I really like that. I mean, that's an awesome metaphor for helping anyone to see the value of feedback. How have you done it with your teams? Do you do something similar with your teams?
I tell them all that story.
Yeah.
And some of them don't understand it. And one of my team members, funny enough, recently, who's been with us for about 4 or 5 years, recently came up to me and said, "I remember you telling me that. And actually, at the time, I didn't quite get the significance of it." because it does take time. And again, it's not something that happens overnight. So it's one of the things, again, that I always tell new team members. I discuss that with them, as well as talking about the fact that they can tell me anything and ask me anything. So, yeah.
And when you say you can tell me anything and ask me anything, it's critical then, as you've undoubtedly done as a leader, to then make sure that your reaction to that, especially if it's negative, isn't seen to be confronting for the person giving it to you. It's that, hey, that's a gift, thank you. And then that makes them more comfortable to give you more feedback. Because my experience with it is that, it's kind of like when you've got a new leader that you're reporting to, and you want to tell them something that might be perceived as negative, you kind of dip your toe in the water, you put your big toe through their office door and you just lob in a little one and see how they react. And if it's bad, you're probably not going to do it again. But if they take it in good grace and at least if they think about it, even if they come back to you and give you the feedback, which is I'm not going to do anything about it at this point, you know that there's a process that you can grow and make.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah. In terms of one of the biggest challenges for organizations is putting technical experts, perhaps their star player, into a leadership role when actually that person ultimately is really going to struggle because they don't really want to let go of what they're doing. And the real path for them is a technical path. Mm. And a lot of organizations historically haven't supported that because the money and the status and the kudos all goes up the management path. So that's where you've got to go. But if you end up in a management role and it's not cut out for you, it's a really stressful, really challenging, tough place to be that you ultimately will hate. How do you go about identifying the people in your teams that might have the best chance of being outstanding leaders or good leaders?
Yeah, I think you mixed two words there in your conversation. It's not.
Was that feedback?
No, definitely not. It was. You used manager and leader, right?
Oh, did I?
Conversation, right? So the point I was going to make on that was that I think we're lucky in Red Hat and a couple of other tech organisations now that good technical people are being recognised for their leadership skills and being able to be promoted to a principal architect or a principal something and get monetary recognition. They're still viewed as a leader within our organisation, right? Because they're a technical lead, and that's really good because that hasn't happened, as you rightly say, for years. What I do is I'll talk to the people really about not leadership, because it might be that they're obvious leaders and other technical people, for example, look up to them. Do you want to go into management rather than leadership, right? Because being a manager isn't always being a leader, and they can mix, and you've got to do both. But do you want to sign off the expense claims and do the HR side of things and do the formal mentoring and things like that? So I try and actually talk to the person about what their longer term aims are, and hopefully, if that's what they want, great, that's really good. But otherwise, try and find a path for them, which is keeping them on the technical side, but giving them more money, more kudos, a better title, etc. So it's really just trying to explore with them which is right for them.
Yeah, and that's a conversation. Do you? Some organisations have built trial pathways to give people a taste of leadership, because often we don't, or management. Often we don't really understand whether we're going to like something or not, and don't know how we're going to feel until we try it. Does Red Hat have an option for that?
Yeah, we do. We have a program which is an online program and partly instructor led, which is, if you like, it's a taste of leadership, right? So it's a proper management program, but it gives you a taste of what you could be doing if you move into a management role. Yeah. Now, and I've had a couple of people I've put onto that and said, well, I don't actually think that's me, right? So, which is a good result.
Yeah, because how brilliant is that? There's so many people get grabbed out of you're the best software developer, you're the best network engineer, you're the best graphic designer, you're whatever it is, you're going to lead the team, and then they hate it. And all that happens is they get stressed and ultimately they leave, and you've not only not got a leader for your team anymore, you've also lost your best technical person, and no one wins out of that, right? You look at
you see it in sport as well, right? You see someone who's a really good first five or whatever they happen to be, and then they get made captain, and then their game collapses.
Right? Yeah, it's It changes everything, doesn't it? It just adds another whole layer, and it's easy when you're sitting outside looking in that it can look really easy. I guess it's perhaps for non-sales people looking at sales roles and going, well, all they do is take people out to lunch and drink coffee and go and have flash dinners. What they don't see is all of the other things that you have to have, and that thick skin you have to deal with that ocean of rejection that you can get.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the big challenges that we've had over the last 2 years, Derek, has been around with COVID and the remote working and more recently the hybrid working with more people coming back to the office. Do you have you found any things that have been useful, helpful, and successful in the remote management and hybrid management of teams, and that
it's tough.
Benefit from?
It's tough actually, because over COVID and now having remote teams, the disconnection we've had has been amazing, right? So I guess what I've learned over the last couple of years, firstly, is you've got to trust people, and you've got to go to a more outcomes-based philosophy. That's the first thing, because you may have had someone who you thought was, maybe not putting the right number of hours in, but they're still getting the results. You actually have to trust that they're doing that, and you learn that maybe they are working only a few hours during the day and a few more hours at night because they've got young kids or something. So you trust that. And the second thing is you've just got to engage, and I don't think it matters how you engage. You've just got to do it regularly. Now we do things like we have regular all hands meetings, regular team brainstorming sessions, went through a stage of doing happy hours on a Friday, where we get the team together and talk about sport or anything with a coffee or a wine or whatever it happens to be. But I think really it's keep connected as much as possible and do it regularly rather than just doing it once a month or once every 3 weeks or whatever it happens to be. We also use things like Google chat rooms pretty extensively, so that there's banter on the chat rooms, which you might say, well, it's not face to face, but it doesn't matter. It still provides a forum where people can sort of laugh and interact with each other. The other thing I was thinking about, and someone internally was talking about it, was checking in within the team regularly to see how they're doing. I was thinking about implementing a traffic light type model. Green, yellow, red, and actually asking people whether they're green, yellow, or red.
Oh yeah.
A bit nicer than that, right? So if you're green, then all is well, and then you can get people to say why all is well. If they're yellow, it's sort of not great, not bad, so there's a bit to worry about. And obviously, if it's red, you've got a lot more to talk about. And actually trying to implement something like that for the remote teams. Yeah,
and you've got a big remote group, haven't you? Because you got New Zealand, but you've also got Australia. So
I've got Perth, Sydney, Melbourne, Auckland, Wellington.
Yeah.
So it's fairly diverse.
And do you find there's much of a difference in the way that the sort of more subtle differences between New Zealand and Australian culture in terms of how you interact with the teams?
I think that probably particularly the people, if you look at the people in Melbourne as an example, they suffered from a 272-day lockdown, I think. So the people in Melbourne were craving much more of a human touch, if you like, and much more of that. So I think it's definitely have to have much more regular discussions with those remote teams in Australia.
Yeah.
Because we had the tyranny of distance as well. And even when we came out of COVID, it was much easier for me going forward to pop down to Wellington for a day than it is to pop over to Melbourne or Perth for a day.
Yeah. Yes. So there's definitely more of a disconnect, isn't there? And it's we are as leaders and managers really still wrestling with this whole thing, and there isn't a one size fits all or one way to do it. Really.
And there's still some people who are reticent to be back in the office regularly as well.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. I went to a presentation the other day from a guy who runs a New Zealand company, but he owns a New Zealand company, but he's based out of the US now. And they've done some research, and he was presenting on the research. But one of the things that I hadn't considered was that came out of his findings was that there are people who have never ever been in an office. they've started in the workforce since COVID and they've never been in an office. And then there are people at the other, and so they've always worked remotely and don't know what the office is like. And then there's people at the other end who have, until recently, never ever worked not in an office. And now they're having to cope with that and everything in between. And, there were things like, well, you're going to get everyone back in the office. Well, what does this person wear? Are they stressed? Where's the bathroom? What do they do? And coping with all of those things across the ages, the generations, and the experience, it's really challenging, isn't it? Are you seeing any of that in Red Hat?
Yeah, very much. We, if I look in New Zealand as an example, we had, was it 2 years ago when we started COVID? It was 2 years ago. In March, we employed 4 people, 2 of whom spent a week in the office before we locked down, and 2 who never saw the office. Right, so they literally done all the first 3 or 4 months of work for us was completely remote, without meeting the rest of the team on a social basis.
Yeah.
Now, again, I think we managed to bring them into the team with regular catch-ups and regular, one-on-ones and that sort of thing. But they've literally never seen the office. So a couple of months ago, when I was in Melbourne for the first time, travelling for the first time since lockdown, I met one of my team members for the first time face-to-face. It's very different dynamics.
Different experience and different things that leaders have to think about when they're looking to direct interaction with their team members and getting the teams together, and the different concerns and fears that people may have out the back of COVID and everything that's been associated with.
I think we've been pretty lucky as an organisation because about a third of our workforce worked remotely anyway. Because they were doing, they were remote software engineers and so there was a bit of the organisation itself was quite used to remote working. So.
Yeah. Just to change gears slightly, Derek, if you can put on your memory cap and just think back to when you stepped up from leading a team of technical people, software developers or whatever you happened to be leading at the time, into a role that was leading leaders that were leading teams. Is there anything there that you learnt that really helped you make that transition? Because it's quite different leading through other people than it is leading directly.
Yeah, look, I think I mentioned before about the sort of common goal and the team members' abilities. That becomes even more important, I think, when you've got a team of leaders, when you've got managers that are working for you. And also making sure that you're not reaching through those managers or around those managers to discuss things with their team. It doesn't mean you can't do that. I'm quite a big fan of skip meetings where someone in the team can talk to a leader's leader, if you like. That's fine, but that's prearranged and that's something that everyone knows about. I've seen pitfalls whereby you've got a new leader in place and the manager constantly goes around that leader to discuss something with one of their team. So effectively, you're usurping them, right? So I think the other thing is, you've got to make sure that yourself and those leaders keep on learning from their peers and colleagues and team managers. So making sure that person has got a network of people to learn from, rather than just myself or their leader. I think it's really important.
So this is in your role from stepping up from leading a team to leading leaders. That's when you need to have the network, or
both levels, I think. Right?
Both levels, yeah. And my sense of that is that it really doesn't matter where you are in an organisation. You need to build your network, because you never know when you might be able to help someone or someone might be able to help you. And
exactly.
Yeah. And there's always been a bit of a negative connotation around networking, which I try and deflate that idea that it's not all about making shallow relationships with people. It's when you're out in amongst talking to people, you find people that you click with, and those are the ones that you build the relationship with, and over time they'll grow and do their things. Derek, that's been absolutely awesome. If there was one piece of advice that you could put on a billboard, or a pithy statement you could put on a billboard for new leaders, what would that be?
One piece on a billboard. Okay. I think you've probably heard of something called the 3 E's, right? And it's engage, empathise, and empower, right? So I think that's the thing I put on a billboard. You've got to engage regularly. you've got to get to know your team on a personal level and be sort of curious and ask them questions and show that you're vulnerable. And you've got to empower them, right? So to be an effective leader, you've got to make sure that you bring others with you and you let them make decisions. So I think that's not a very good billboard thing there, but it's the 3 E's for me. It's that's what does it.
Yeah, well, I think it's perfect in front of a billboard. You could just, there's 3 words on this big billboard that just stands out, right? They might need a little, someone might go, I wonder what the depth of that is, but you can talk to that. That's great. Is there anything, just before we wrap up, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like me to?
Well, one thing that I thought you might have asked me, which you haven't, was what's the most satisfying thing about being a leader? I guess that's the.
I like the question.
I thought maybe you'll ask that question. So, and for me, it's not about my own personal development. It's more about, for me, the most satisfying thing is seeing the team grow, seeing the team do well, and seeing the team act as a team, right? So rather than just a bunch of individuals. So that's, for me, that's what lights me up every day.
Yeah. And is that something that you sort of developed over time, or was that really clear to you from your early leadership days?
No, it certainly wasn't clear, first of all. It was all about me.
Yeah. And there's a really good piece of advice, right? Is that leadership's not all about you as a leader. It's the other way around, right? Which you've come to.
Yeah.
Derek, thank you. That's been an amazing chat. Really, really enjoyed it. Thanks very much for all your great ideas. And I particularly like that last question. That's one I haven't got on my list of questions. So that's going straight on my list. I'm going to steal that off you.
Yeah, thanks, Campbell. It's been really good. Good to see you again.
Great. All right. We'll catch up soon. Cheers.
Thanks for listening. If you have a friend or a colleague who would benefit from this episode, please pass the word along. If you have a friend or a colleague who would not benefit, but you haven't been in touch with them for a while, give them a call. iTunes reviews are great to get the word out and to help me create the show that's most useful for you. And if you're frustrated or having challenges or would like some help, guidance, assistance with your first leadership role, then check out integrationcatalyst.com in the link in the podcast notes below. Or pass this on to your boss to nudge them to get you the help you really need to cross the doing to managing chasm and get you powered up on your leadership and management journey. Oh, and if you want to make sure you don't miss an episode, hit subscribe. Until next time.